What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and we are back with more 10th edition faction reveal articles, and this one is a big one. Less so because of its implications for the faction itself, although obviously we're going to talk about the rules for Adepta Sororitas, but there's a couple tidbits in this article that have huge implications for the attack sequence and the resolution of attacks in games of 10th edition Warhammer 40k. So let's dive in to what's in this article, talk about how strong Adepta Sororitas are gonna be, and exactly what could be so transformative to the game. First off, we see the return of Sororitas' classic army rules acts of faith. These grant them miracle dice that they can use to substitute in for dice on a specific set of dice rolls that is called out in the Acts of Faith ability. Now, what has changed a little bit are how you gain miracle dice and some of the idiosyncrasies to how they're spent. In the previous edition, Sororitas players were generated miracle dice at the start of each turn and when they destroyed enemy units with attacks. Now, they gain them when Adepta Sororitas units specifically are destroyed. So previously, this was a mechanic that was kind of saved for Sisters Repentia. Those were meant to be the suicide troops that would go in, die, and generate miracle dice for you. Now, instead, any Adepta Sororitas unit can do that. We don't know what Sisters Repentia do now, but it may be that they have an additional effect on top of generating miracle dice for you. Otherwise, the mechanic is the same. When a miracle dice is generated, you roll it and add it to your miracle dice pool set to whatever facing you just rolled. Now, it's not indicated in the army roll as spelled out by the article, but it is discussed later in the article that Acts of Faith are restricted to once per unit per phase. When you use them, it is before you make an advance roll, battle shock test, charge roll, damage roll, hit roll, saving throw, or wound roll. Only those specific kinds of rolls can be Acts of Faith. Set aside one of the dice for that roll and instead substitute the die from your miracle pool. Now, importantly, this is one of the dice, not all of the dice. So, unlike previous editions, you will no longer be able to throw both dice in for a charge roll, for example, and automatically make 12-inch charges. The best you can do is have a 6 for one of the dice and roll the second die. So your chance of getting that 12-inch charge is much higher, but it isn't guaranteed like it was in the past. So this is a significant downgrade of the Acts of Faith mechanic. The same goes for battle shock tests. Those are a 2d6 roll, and you can only substitute one of them, so you'll still have to roll the second one. And as we've been seeing, this is in the line of other factions where their ability to be immune to morale effects has been significantly reduced. Now, on top of this is the detachment roll for the Hallowed Martyrs detachment, which is going to be the Adepta Sororitas detachment at the start of 10th edition. We've already seen that Adepta Sororitas are encouraged to lose their models because they want to be losing units to be gaining miracle dice, or at the very least, they are less worried about losing units because they'll start generating those miracle dice when their units die. And the Blood of Martyrs basically does the same thing. As long as a unit is below its starting strength, it gets +1 to hit on all of its attacks, both ranged and melee. If that unit is below half strength, it is now also +1 to wound, both in range and melee. This has the potential to be a wildly powerful detachment ability. I can imagine that you'll start to see characters in large or mid-strength units with a lot of bolter-wielding battle sisters, specifically for the opportunity to assign wounds to them and kill them to grant bonuses to the characters leading those units. And as we'll see later on in the article, there are some insane leader units that you can attach into Sororitas units. If we see a similar level of damage output to previous editions of characters like Canonesses or the Sanctified characters like Morvenn Vahl or Ephraim Stern and Kaiganel, this ability can absolutely throw those characters through the roof. Now, I think it's also important to talk about one of the stratagems for this detachment. This is Rejoice the Fallen, a stratagem for that Hallowed Martyrs detachment. This triggers after your opponent has resolved ranged attacks. If you lost models during that ranged attack, you can select one of the units from your army that did so. It can then shoot back at the unit that had attacked it. So importantly, what you can do with this stratagem is have a unit like Retributors, a very powerful heavy weapon unit, with a couple bolter-armed sisters playing relatively aggressively. If your opponent shoots them and is unable to kill the unit, you remove the bolter-armed sisters, granting you +1 to hit and potentially also +1 to wound, then spend a CP and fire your multi-meltas, heavy bolters, or heavy flamers back into whatever just hit you. In the past, Sororitas have been a relatively passive army that tries to set up favorable peace trades for itself, using its small, inexpensive, but very light units to trade dramatically up for more than they're worth. And it seems like the archetype is kind of the same in the new edition. However, sisters are now more incentivized to play more aggressively and be a little bit more reckless with their units. because they're not only going to gain miracle dice from those units dying, but they're also potentially going to supercharge those units as well if they take casualties but aren't destroyed. And what are some of the units that we are going to be supercharging? We can dive into some data sheets here. The first one we want to talk about is the normal Battle Sister Squad. Now, unfortunately, we just have the backside of the card with the stat block on it. We don't know what the unit composition is and whether or not this unit can still be taken in bricks of 20. The unit has a brace of weapon options and some really powerful abilities. First off, it's equipped with a Cherub, which regenerates a miracle die once per game after the unit has performed an active faith. So it gives you a free roll on one of your miracle dice that you use on this unit. You get to spend it, remove the Cherub, re-roll the miracle dice. Importantly, it doesn't come back at the same facing. You have to roll it again, but that's a small price to pay. These units are also a farm for miracle dice, gaining you a miracle die for each objective that a unit with the Defenders of the Faith ability is controlling. So this means, importantly, that you can't put all of your Battle Sister squads in range of a single objective and generate miracle dice from each of them. Instead, each individual Battle Sister squad is going to have to go to a separate objective, but each objective that you control that way is going to start farming you resources to boost the rest of your army. Even if you're not playing big units and special weapons in the squads to make them do more damage, a couple of these units farming 2 to 3 miracle dice in your backline every turn is going to be super useful to power the rest of your Sororitas army. If the unit is equipped with a Simulacrum Imperialis, each time it destroys an enemy, you also gain a miracle die. I imagine that this will see play in some of the more fight-oriented Battle Sister units as well, not just the Battle Sister squad proper, which means that you will probably be at a much greater volume of miracle dice than we've seen in the past. Not only are you gaining them from holding objectives at the start of your turn from your units dying, but most of your units are also going to be generating them from killing your opponent's army. While the Shield of Faith ability has been removed and its protection against psychic powers is gone, which is fair because Deny the Witch is no longer a mechanic, so don't have to worry about that. The Battle Sister squad does retain their 6+ invulnerable save, alongside that 3+ armor save with a relatively poor toughness of 3. This keeps them as being relatively easy to kill, especially with mid-weight weapons, but that high save and invulnerable save means that you can never guarantee you kill a Battle Sister squad. If they have any 6s in their miracle pool, they can keep 1 or 2 models alive pretty easily just by burning Acts of Faith on them. They also have a mediocre leadership of 7+, but with the miracle mechanic able to substitute in decent dice for those leadership checks, that's not going to be too bad, and an expected objective control value of 2, given that this is a battle line unit. There's lots to glean from the ranged weapon statistics of this unit as well. Most of the Battle Sisters will be armed with bolt guns and close combat weapons, so strength 4 AP 0 ranged attacks and strength 3 AP 0 melee attacks that only hit on 4s. However, they do have access to chain swords and power weapons, most likely on that superior. The special weapon sisters in the squad, however, can equip a brace of really powerful ranged weapons, including Ministorum Flamers and Heavy Flamers, which retain their additional strength over the normal variety of these weapons from armies like Space Marines or Astra Militarum, and they get that new Ignore Cover mechanic in addition to Torrent. So they're automatically hitting and ignoring cover, shooting through that +1 save that your opponent could be getting from standing in terrain. We see expected profiles for the Meltagun and Multi-Melta, with the newly debuffed ranged for the Multi-Melta down to 18 inches, so getting an additional 2 damage at 9 rather than 12, and the standard Meltagun at a 1-shot at 12 inches. One thing I'm noticing is that the Meltagun actually doesn't have the assault characteristic, so it is not able to advance and fire as well. Big debuff to the Meltagun, going alongside the fact that its strength in comparison to most vehicles has been reduced. Whereas Meltaguns wounded almost every vehicle in the game on 4s previously, they're now wounding the majority on 5s. That said, I don't think Meltaguns are entirely dead for Adepta Sororitas, because part of their play pattern is going to be trying to force their opponent to inflict casualties on them in order to buff their wound roll and get them back to wounding on 4s with that +1 to wound. It's also going to give them +1 to hit, and they no longer suffer penalties for moving and shooting Multi-Meltas, not to mention the fact that they can get +1 to hit for standing still thanks to the new heavy mechanic. Unfortunately, the Multi-Melta does come in at a base ballistic skill of 4, so it is going to need that +1 to hit from losing casualties or remaining stationary in order to convert its attacks more concretely. Now we also have the Artificer Crafted Stormbolter, a rapid fire 2 damage weapon that is significantly more powerful than the Space Marine variety that we've been seeing on Terminators and Space Marine Captains. And last but not least, the Heavy Bolter finally makes its appearance. While we have seen the twin Heavy Bolter on a lot of vehicles, the actual standard version of the Heavy Bolter has not been shown yet. So, unlike the twin version, this one is not twin linked. It does have the heavy keyword, meaning that it gets +1 to hit when remaining stationary, which is important because its base ballistic skill is only a 4. That's a little bit of an unfortunate debuff for the Heavy Bolter, but one thing that we had theorized in the past is that the sustained hits mechanic would carry over from the twin heavy bolter to the standard one, and it looks like that has happened, giving the heavy bolter additional hits on critical hits, so hit rolls of 6+. While it might be a frivolous use of miracle dice, you can force those through using 6s from your miracle pool, but it also means that heavy bolters are actually more accurate than they were in the previous edition. Mathematically, sustained hits is roughly equivalent to an additional +1 to hit, meaning that the heavy bolter is basically the same as it was, hitting on 3s, but now has the benefit of that heavy keyword, allowing you to stand still and get an additional +1 on top of that. We don't know if hit bonuses stack currently, and if the Battle Sister Squad is able to stack +1 to hit from their detachment ability and +1 to hit from the heavy keyword, it actually can make their heavy bolters incredibly effective, hitting on 2s and exploding on their 6s. That should convert 100% of your attacks mathematically, but obviously math is weird. That's super interesting to see, and I wonder if we are going to see some pretty solid heavy bolter platforms in other factions. Things like the Rapier Carrier come to mind for Space Marines, where they could have 4 heavy bolters for a total of 12 shots, or maybe 6 twin linked, with the sustained hits mechanic giving them that many additional conversions. Alongside rerolls from Oaths of Moment, or I don't know, some sort of stratagem or something, that weapon can be pretty effective. Moving on to one of the characters from the faction, they have spoiled the datasheet for the Triumph of St. Catherine. Very interesting one to showcase in this article. To be honest, a lot going on this datasheet. The first thing that jumps out to me is that the Triumph of St. Catherine is a leader, meaning that it will be added to units. Now, I have no idea what unit is going to take the Triumph of St. Catherine, which basically is itself an entire unit. I imagine it's something like Celestians or Sacrosaunts, but we'll just have to see. If they can be added to like a 20 model Battle Sister Squad, that'd be funny. The Triumph retains a lot of its characteristic statistics, including its low move and toughness for such a large model, representing the fact that it is basically just a couple of infantry models on a base. However, it sticks at that 18 wounds, and importantly, like we talked about in the Demons article with the Keeper of Secrets and Bellicor, 18 wounds is no longer the detriment that it previously was. If you don't have the Towering or Aircraft keyword, obscuring terrain, specifically ruins, will still block line of sight to you. So we no longer need an ability that makes the Triumph of St. Catherine obscurable by normal obscuring terrain despite its high wounds characteristic. It now will just operate like a normal unit that is exceptionally hard to kill. It has a massive OC value of 6, a pretty solid leadership of 6+, which again is going to be transferred over to the whatever unit it joins, and you can miracle dice your battle shock tests if you need it, alongside a strong invulnerable saving throw of a 4+. It has gotten a little bit of a side grade on its attacks characteristic. Now, the Triumph makes 18 attacks rather than its previous 10. However, it no longer has the leader of the procession carrying the Martyr Sword, a 2 damage melee weapon. Now, everyone has the same relic weapons profile, coming in at Strength 5, AP 2 for only 1 damage, but a 2+ weapon skill. Now, the important thing about this datasheet are the relics of the Matriarch's abilities. And like we've been seeing on almost all the other faction leader datasheets that have been previewed so far, this is a modal ability that is chosen at the start of the battle round, so just like Guilliman and Bellicor and Abaddon before. Unlike those ones, however, the Triumph of St. Catherine has 6 to choose from, and at its top profile chooses 2 to effect until the next battle round. The ones it has to choose from are the Fiery Heart, allowing you to automatically gain 6s on your miracle dice pool if units within 6 inches of the Triumph are destroyed. The Censer of the Bloody Rose, giving +1 leadership to Sororitas units within 6, improving its own leadership down to 5, making it very unlikely that it's going to fail those leadership checks. The Simulacre of the Ebon Chalice, allowing you to perform 2 acts of faith per phase for units within 6 inches. The Simulacrum of the Argent Shroud, giving +1 attack to rapid fire weapons to models within 6 inches, including things like Artificer Stormbolters, moving their total number of shots at half range up to 5. The Icon of the Valorous Heart, which gains Feel No Pain 6+ for everyone within 6 inches. This also includes the Triumph as well, so if you're already including it in a high volume unit, at least 10 models in it, plus the 18 wounds in the Triumph, plus whatever else is standing in front of them, that's going to be a lot of wounds to chew through. It also importantly affects vehicles, so things like Paragon Warsuits and Castigators will also be affected by that 6+ Feel No Pain, which could be pretty useful. Last but certainly not least, the Petals of the Bloody Rose give lethal hits to Sororitas units within 6 in melee. Now, unfortunately, those are all the data sheets that we've been shown so far, but we have been shown a couple of melee weapons. The first one is from Morvenn Vahl, which, I don't know, man. The Lance of Illumination in Morvenn Vahl's battlesuit is now 5 attacks at 2+ weapon scale, Strength 8, AP 2, and 3 damage with the Devastating Wounds characteristic. This is a total reduction of 1 AP and a little bit of a side grade of the mortal wounds that it used to deal on wound rolls of 6. Previously, it would deal an additional mortal wound on top of normal damage, so you would get additional damage out of it, but it was only a single mortal wound, not the 3 that you get now. This is better against lighter units, and carrying over additional mortal wounds is more useful, but obviously getting more damage is also usually better. A little bit of a downgrade. The sweep profile is relatively unchanged, swinging 10 attacks, hitting on 2s at strength 5 and AP 1. This again represents the reduction of AP by 1, which is in line with the overall reduction in AP across the entire game. Kind of a whatever melee weapon, to be honest. Morvenn Vahl's melee weapon was always very good, but not, you know, the most exciting thing, especially when it comes to vehicle-equipped special characters. The interesting thing about it is that Morvenn Vahl's abilities would usually supercharge those attacks, giving her potentially full rerolls, either from her own inbuilt Commander of the Adepta Sororitas ability or her Warlord trait, and then allowing her to double fight once per game, so she would actually make 10 3 damage attacks with full rerolls, and we don't know if any of those are still on her datasheet. We've saved the best for last, however, because the exciting inclusion in this article is the Exorcist launcher. Overall, the weapon has gone through a little bit of a side grade. The Exorcist is a little bit unique in terms of missile launcher tanks, I guess similar to the Whirlwind, where it equips an entire missile launcher capable of firing a single type of missile, unlike man-portable missile launchers, which will choose either frag or crack missiles to fire. Instead, the Exorcist can equip conflagration rockets, which fire 3d6, strength 5, AP0 1 damage attacks, but with the ignore cover keyword. These are also blast and indirect fire, and that ignore cover is going to interact in a very important way. More exciting option to me, however, is the standard Exorcist missile launcher. This has gotten kind of a big side grade from its previous incarnation. It has the heavy and indirect fire keywords, and I think the heavy keyword is important here because the Exorcist will most likely be standing still most of the time. So while we see these are at a 3+ ballistic skill, they are most likely going to hit most things on 2s. It comes in at an impressive strength 10, which is basically the same as it was previously. It used to be strength 8, meaning that it wounded most vehicles on 3s, but heavier stuff on 4s. Now there's going to be classes of vehicles that the Exorcist missile launcher wounds on 5s, but it will also be that much more effective against light or medium infantry. A little bit of a side grade, it retains its AP value of 2 for D6 shots, however has moved from D3 plus 3 to D6 plus 2. Now, previous editions of 40k have been absolutely dominated by artillery weapons that fire not requiring line of sight. And so the indirect fire keyword, I think, is the most important one to talk about here. Not only because it's going to give us a lot of information about how these artillery weapons will work in 10th edition, but also because there are some tidbits within the wording of this rule that could be hugely impactful for exactly how attacks work in the new edition. The first thing I want to say, obviously, is that this is a super powerful indirect fire weapon. So it doesn't look like the reduction in the power of artillery has been reduced. And this is because, obviously, the indirect fire keyword, just as it does in the current version of 40k, allows you to fire these weapons at targets that are not visible to the attacking model. It has a similar debuff to the current incarnation of indirect fire, where if you fire at a unit that the indirect firer does not see, you get -1 to hit, and now grant your target the benefit of cover. Importantly, this means that artillery that ignores the benefit of cover, like the conflagration launcher does on this example, are going to be able to fire through most of that indirect fire penalty without too much trouble. And the fact that this has the heavy keyword means that they're going to circumvent that -1 to hit. Obviously, it still means they'll hit on 3s instead of 2s. They'll hit on 2s against something that they have direct line of sight to, but if they're firing over a wall, hitting on 3s is usually fine. So to be honest, Exorcists sound absolutely nightmarish. A brick of 3 of them standing behind a wall, firing 6 plus 3 d6, strength 10, AP2 d6 damage shots into whatever you love most dearly in your life, and then substituting several of those damage rolls for high rolls thanks to the Acts of Faith ability is going to be disgusting. So while the rest of the Adepta Sororitas army is going to be incentivized to play a little bit more aggressively in order to lose models and potentially units to gain bonuses, the Exorcists are definitely not going to be doing that. So if I was an Exorcist stan, I would be over the moon with the spoiling of this profile. But what else I want to talk about here is this clause in the indirect fire rule that says that indirect fire attacks can destroy enemy models in a target unit even though they may not have been visible to the attacking unit when they selected the target. Now, we haven't gotten all of the rules for targeting and attack resolution in 10th edition quite yet, but what this speaks to me is that models that are invisible to the attacking unit may be ineligible to suffer damage from attacks made by that unit. and this is huge. Whether or not this is under control of the controlling player, we don't know, but if it's the case, then poking out special weapon teams in order to fire missile launchers at your opponent's tanks or something means that return fire, as long as the tank can't see any other models in that unit, will just straight up kill your heavy weapons if you don't have any bolter mooks standing out in the open to take hits for them. In addition, this also means that wholesale removing opponents' units with ranged attacks is going to be super difficult, since all you need is one model to sit in the back of the unit out of line of sight, and suddenly that model is largely immune to their shooting. That model is also guaranteed not to run away to morale unless you're playing Chaos Demons or something, because morale no longer inflicts casualties on units suffering them. But this kind of makes sense because the Battle Shock mechanic also prevents you from holding objectives. So if you put a couple models behind line of sight on an objective, the rest of your unit break cover in order to shoot at your opponent and then subsequently die. If those remaining models that are hiding behind line of sight fail that Battle Shock, you will basically have lost the unit functionally for that battle round anyway. This is kind of hugely transformative to how a game of 40k is going to carry out, and it's absolutely wild that I don't know if it's been touched on quite yet. What I would like to see is kind of a happy medium between the old versions of attack allocation and only being able to hit units that are in line of sight. I think that the defending player should be able to allocate damage wherever in their unit that they want to, so you don't accidentally end up losing characters or have some chicanery happen where, for example, the attacking player blocks line of sight to everyone in the unit besides their unit champions and special weapons, then makes their attacks in order to assign damage directly to them. The way to defeat that is obviously give the defending player the opportunity to just take those damage somewhere else, but they shouldn't be required to. If they want to, they can just lose the models that are in line of sight of their opponent and leave it at that, or they can continue to allocate damage to models that are out of line of sight as they sort of take the space of models who are dying. I don't know if that's how it works, but I kind of hope it does, because I think that adds a ton of interesting gameplay to the game. And I would love to know more about exactly how these attack sequences carry out, because just slotting this in here as a part of the indirect fire rule is pretty wild. Big exciting stuff from the Adepta Sororitas article. The units themselves seem pretty fine. The changes to Acts of Faith allow you to generate more miracle dice without it being insane. But then also, we get these Exorcist missile launchers, which look absolutely ludicrously powerful. So let me know down in the comments what you think about this article. Big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everyone who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers. All you people are great. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and continue performing those acts of faith.